Welcome, Natalie. Welcome, Celinda. Welcome, Jeanie. My apologies for those first few minutes. Things were not exactly in order. I'm not sure exactly why, but we're rocking now. So welcome, everybody. Delighted that you're here. We are in Bristol, Virginia, and experiencing more beautiful weather. Garden work is with us now, and we're delighted that you're here to be part of this conversation. And I see that Natalie's with us. Welcome, young lady. And Celinda, Joe, glad that you're here. And if you're out there in listener land and you have a thought or a question for us, there were one or two other people who were in the show and then dropped off when it wasn't operating. I just sent a message inviting them to try again. My apology. Jeanie's usually here doing this technology stuff. In the meantime, if anyone has a thought or a question for us, push the call button. Let's say hello. How can we support you? What's on your mind? Natalie, I see you're with us. We were doing a lot of processing last week. And so if there's any way we can support you, then please push that call button and let's continue the conversation. And if we're not going to get any hands up, then Cami? Okay, Cami, if you're there through the link, if you look up at the top of the web page, you'll see there are two buttons, one for an Android and one for an iPhone. If you push that, you can download the app, and then you can talk to us and interact fully with us if you open the app and listen to us there. So that will change your ability to interact. In any event, no hands up, so I'm going to just rock on. And we talked about Braveheart last week. And so we want to address or just check in with everybody and see if you watched that film since last week when we had that conversation, and how it impacted you. If you've got any thoughts, you can put those thoughts in the chat room, or you can push the call button and we'll have a conversation about it. If you weren't on the call last week, then we were dealing with an issue in one of the radio shows last week of abuse and institutional unfairness. And I brought up the movie Braveheart last week. Jeanie, I see you're asking if I can hear you, but pardon me, if anybody else can hear me. Let me just shift here one more thing. And admit that Jeanie is the technology guru. So excuse my awkwardness at this. That should be better now, Jeanie. Well, we're glad you're here too, Jane. Thank you. Delighted and honored. And that hopefully will give us a better sound. So in any event, we were talking about the movie Braveheart, and I suggested last week that everyone give a listen to that with the issue we were dealing with around this idea of abuse and institutional unfairness. And Jeanie and I watched that film the other night. I shared on the radio show that when I first watched that movie Braveheart, there was a scene in it where the construct that came up in my mind, the meaning that came up in my mind was absolute hatred and a desire to kill the king. And I shared last week that over a period of actually several years, every time that hatred came up in me, when I would notice that energy, I'd watch that movie again and work with forgiveness regarding that energy in myself. Remembering that forgiveness is not about letting somebody else off the hook for that was moving in me, but it's how I go inside myself and remove that energy in me. And so probably over a period of several years, I watched that movie about 15 times and have not felt the need to watch it in years. And prior to the first time I confronted that hatred in myself, if someone asked, do you hold hatred? I said, no, never, not me. But so let me just offer a little history and how that fits. And if you haven't watched Braveheart yet, you might want to go ahead and watch it. But in my early career, prior to choosing to do this work full time, which I've been doing now for 50 or so plus years, I was in the business world. I owned and managed about 3,000 seats in 3 different restaurant locations. And several years into my ventures, I had started to do this work and woke up one day with the guidance to drop out of the business world and go back to school, which is what I did. And at that time, I had an Eldorado on one side of my driveway. I had a Mark III on the other. I had a penthouse apartment in one city. I had homes in 2 other cities. You know, I was living high life. And I moved to Atlanta when I decided to leave the business world, and I was going back to school in Atlanta. I had decided I wanted to go to law school, and I was studying naturopathic medicine. So I moved to Atlanta where I was able to do both. And, you know, I went from the high life to where I exchanged taking care of a house with several small apartments in it for my rent in a 1-room apartment as I went to school. It was definitely a downgrade in lifestyle. And not too far from where I lived in Atlanta, there was a franchise or a vegetarian restaurant that decided to franchise themselves. And I'd gotten to know the owners. It was one of my favorite restaurants. And they were having a franchise meeting. And since I'd been in the food business, they had asked me if I'd come and, you know, just give them any feedback that I had. So I was like, sure. So I was invited to their franchise meeting. And I was, you know, sitting enjoying the presentations of each of the participants up to the point when the chef got up to speak. And literally the minute that the chef got up to speak, a muscle down the left side of my neck tightened, and it tightened to the point where, I mean, it literally contracted so much that it pulled my head down almost to my shoulder. You know, it was just this really excruciatingly painful pull on my neck. And I had no awareness, no cognitive awareness of anything going on aside from what was going on in the meeting. So I kind of mentally checked out of the meeting and, you know, took a breath and went inside. I'd been doing this work for, probably 2 years at that point or so on a part-time basis. So I went inside to check and see, you know, what's going on here? What's this about? And as I breathed and tapped in, the memory came of a chef that I had in my first restaurant. And that restaurant was a really awesome place that had been through some rough times for 2 or 3 different owners that kind of ran the business down. And I bought the place and was rebuilding it. I spent about 2 years rebuilding. And we had a major opportunity to kind of showcase the restaurant to the local community, you know, kind of do a kickstart of the business at a new level. It was a small town, and the man who owned the most popular bar in town had passed away. And my restaurant was the only location big enough to house all the dignitaries and the local political people and the townsfolk and all for his wake. So it was an opportunity to really open the whole place up to the community. My chef at the time, who was absolutely awesome in what he could do with food, unfortunately had a surprise for me. Under excessive stress, I now realize that was his trigger. He was a drinker. I'd never seen him drink. But that night, he stayed up. We had about 600 gifts coming for this wake. And he stayed up all night cooking and drinking. And the next day, as 600 chicken meals went out, they were all served raw. Just shattered 2 years of work. And of course, I fired him. But in all the turmoil and all that was going on, I had paid no attention whatsoever to this hatred that developed for him. And when the chef, this would have been about probably 5 years later now, 4 years later maybe. I'm sitting in this franchise meeting and the chef gets up to speak, and all of a sudden my body gives me a signal. When that happened, I actually named that my hate muscle, and I knew that any time that tightened, that I really need to pay attention to what was going on, and it became a signal for me. So I did some work around it, and thought I was finished with it. And then along came the movie Braveheart. And the scene that I shared with you last week, where the king instructs one of his generals to conserve their arrows because the arrows cost them money, but send the Irish into battle because they don't cost anything if they get slaughtered, so what? Just brought up that, showed me another layer of that hatred that I really need to deal with. I was pleasantly surprised when Jeanie and I watched Braveheart. As I said, it had been several years since I'd been inclined to watch that film and look at that issue, but I felt absolutely no sign, no indication of any of that energy whatsoever as we came upon that particular scene in the film. However, early in the film, I had noticed a different reality that was easy for me to slip into. That was another major opportunity for me to learn forgiveness. The behaviors in the film on the part of the king, the knights, the soldiers involved was so abhorrent that it was easy for me to construct a reality that I would describe as justified vengeance. And so, while the hatred was not an issue in watching the film this week, I did catch myself, like kind of subtly going rah, rah, yeah, get him, which is just another energetic pattern based in hostility. And it was just, too easy to jump into that position for being able to justify. And of course, in our world, the way our world operates, we could all justify that, I would suspect. But for me, what I recognize, is planet Earth is the punishment planet. And it's time for us to put an end to punishment on the earth. There has never been a child, there has never been a human being created that has deserved punishment. It's just not anything that anybody. Well, but Michael, some of the terrible things, yeah, and you know what? Hurting people hurt people. That's what we know. People who are not in pain and trauma and dissociated from their own pain and trauma don't lash out, don't hurt, don't punish. If there is an inclination to lash out, to hurt, or to punish, then there's work to be done. And that's the basis the whole root of our work on codependence, is to recognize when one is doing a behavior that is out of harmony with the truth of who they are as love, and each of us is created of that exact same energy, then sourcing, engaging in, or finding acceptable any form of behavior based on anything other than love becomes a fit topic for forgiveness. You know, the mind is a meaning-making device. That's what it does. And you remember the lesson from the Course in Miracles. It says, I have given this all the meaning it has for me. So my offering is, if your mind gives a meaning that can entertain punishment, which is what I noticed as I watched that film, that's the project I'm currently working on for me, is cleaning out the next layer of even consenting to the idea that anyone deserves to be hurt or punished. And that goes all the way back into, we live in a culture that has an insane saying that comes out of churchianity that says, spare the rod, spoil the child. And people have actually hallucinated that means the rod is something, spare it, you're not hitting the child and you're not teaching the child properly. Whereas if you look at that word in the scriptures, the rod is something that is there for support, assistance, and comfort. It's not there for beating on kids. So when one realizes that there are realities that are anything less than love, then that's where the work of forgiveness comes in. And remembering that the word forgive is a tool with which I change the content of my mind, with which I remove from my mind that which I say, I do not choose to continue to own this. And, one of the lessons that was reinforced as I watched this the other night is that we're good at hiding from ourselves. I quoted Richard Feynman, a quote I came across recently where Richard Feynman says, in order to correct yourself, you have to bend over backwards because you're the easiest person there is to fool. Words to that effect. That's not the exact quote, but close enough to it. And so to be constantly vigilant and on guard to look at the next layer in the chain of realities that I need to remove from my mind becomes a necessity if I'm going to really, truly accomplish what this work is about, and that is to free literally my genes, my body, my mind from my emotions, my emotional system, my nervous system, from any energy that's less than love. So recognizing that forgiveness is a tool for unmaking meanings, for freeing ourselves from the meanings that we made. And watching Braveheart last week just taught me that on a whole new level. So understanding how meanings are developed in the mind and how the mind serves up those meanings might be helpful in communicating around this topic. And if you're out there in listener land and that resonates anything for you, put a note in the chat room. Or if there's a question, a thought, something you'd like to process, then please push the caller button. So Linda, welcome, young lady.
Oh.
Is there something we can support you with? You have a question for us, Linda?
I hope you can hear me today. Tim was having problems on his radio show, only it was the reverse of yesterday. I mean Friday. It was he was real soft and everybody else could be heard. Yeah. So, can you hear me all right? Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah, thank you for mentioning Braveheart. I remember watching that film and my responses to it. And I have Scottish, English, and Irish in me, according to my mother's recollection. So,
Right.
you think I don't have a war going on inside? Plus German. There you go. And so I really related to that film. And there was one comment that I was thinking in relation to accountability. I have to watch really carefully to discern whether when I'm holding someone accountable, am I holding them accountable? Is it necessary? Is it the best way? And what are my intentions? Because I can turn accountability, I can hide punishment behind accountability, just like I can with responsibility in a heartbeat. So I just thought I'd share that because I thought that was interesting that you brought up about a need to punish, because I have a real strong need to punish, and sometimes it's simply nagging someone to death, insisting, not letting go of something, like a conversation or something, having to have the last word or justifying myself, which is a pushback, which is a counterattack. Yeah.
Right.
So I thought I'd share that with you.
Good one. Good catch. Thank you.
And I
Appreciate
really
it.
enjoyed what Tim said about Ram Dass and the quote that he had with Ram Dass, where the Ram Dass got so tired of people coming up to him and telling him how enlightened their gurus were, that he finally said, okay, let's schedule a week with your guru. We'll go live in his home, interact with his family, and then at the end of the week, we'll see how enlightened this gentleman or this woman is. And because what he says is spiritual masters have their own neuroses just like everyone else. They have given up perfectionism and reaching for enlightenment, and they take care of their neuroses right on the spot. They put it in the proper perspective. And I thought that I really needed to hear that, so I wanted to share with you my appreciation for both of your programs.
Awesome. I remember when I was in India, if you watched the gurus in the back room, they weren't very nice. Out in front, they were all the enlightenment and all, but that was not the way that people were treated when nobody was watching. At least that was my experience in watching them.
We are all one, aren't we?
Oh, yeah. Yep. We're all the same.
There's no hierarchical order in the kingdom of God. That's
right,
my impression.
And there's no, there's a great line in the Course in Miracles that says there's no, let me get my brain back there. There's no order of difficulty in miracles. That is, when I can bring the active presence of love to shine on any part of my mind or my nervous system that's in pain, no matter its lightness or its depth, active present love is the master solvent. And when forgiveness is applied, that's when we are freed of whatever that energy is.
Thank you. I really appreciate that comment about the nervous system. And there's one other thing I realized listening to Alan Cohen's A Course in Miracles Made Easy, that Tim was reading today. And that was that there was a comment by someone, either her primal student or her daughter or someone, who said that her resistance, she was very intellectual, and maybe she said it herself, the lady who channeled the Course in Miracles, but just one moment, that she said she knew she was an intellectual snob or a literary snob, and I realized that I basically like things very simple, and what I thought A Course in Miracles was a problem for me was the languaging. But I realized it was because at this moment, this is my impression, I was forced into my intellectual brain, downloaded my intellectual brain before I even had one. And what that meant was I built a lot of strong intellectual muscles, but I was also fortunate from the other side of the family, who were very religious, who developed my religious spiritual muscles, faith, those sorts of things that don't come from the intellectual brain, trust, faith, surrender, all of those. And so I realized that I really prefer to hang out in that arena rather than in the intellect, and yet I have this very powerful intellect. And I feel like I'm a mugwump, I'm sitting right on the fence between both sides. So I thought I'd share that. Actually, that could be a great asset rather than a significant liability, depending on how I choose to respond to that.
Well, as the Course warns, I have given this all the meaning it has for me.
Yep.
And every meaning that I hold in my mind, I'm going to find somewhere to plug it in. And of course, if I'm a really devout, committed member of the one world religion of blame, then I'll always have somebody else to blame for this meaning or that, rather than taking responsibility. And of course, the objective of this work is to take responsibility for every meaning that the mind serves up, especially when it's backed with some sort of emotion. Take ownership of it. And if it's one that does not support living as the presence of love, delete it. Free yourself from it.
Right, exactly. And maybe that's where the wonderful corpus callosum comes in, where it connects every part of the brain and to one brain as a grand connector or communicator or a fusion bonding device. And it's kind of nice to explore all of the aspects as a whole rather than just hang out in one or the other all the time.
I don't remember what the organization was, but there is an organization that ended up, scientific organization that ended up with Einstein's brain, literally his physical brain. And they said that compared to all other brains that they had investigated, the only thing different about his brain physiologically was the corpus callosum, the connectors between the two
right.
hemispheres.
I remember you saying that, and I took it to heart, dear sir. I think I need to build my corpus callosum muscles. Can't you see?
Well, there's another piece in the Course that offers a little different perspective, and that is, I need not seek for love. I need only seek, find, and release the barriers that built within myself against it.
Yep, I like that.
So it's more about the letting go part than it is about what we need to build. I think that when we let go, we create this space for the natural reflection of who we are to express fully in physiology.
So letting go is a form of prayer.
Setting a trap for God, yes.
Thank you.
All right, you have a blessed one.
You as well.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. Well, anybody else out there in listener land have a thought for us? If you push the call button, we'll be having a conversation. Otherwise, I have a quote I'd like to share with you. And it's a quote that you've heard me use before, but have not talked about it for some time. And it comes from T.S. Eliot, where he says, "'Tis the greatest treason to do the right thing, the right deed for the wrong reason." And so often the world teaches our minds, provides us with realities, and oftentimes fear motivation to do, quote unquote, the right thing. But underlying the right thing is fear, pain, or trauma of some kind. And so when we, quote unquote, do the right thing for the, quote unquote, wrong reason, it becomes treason, because the energy that's moving in us, that's motivating that behavior, is a treason against ourselves. It's a treason that my offering has been inherited from within the family system, probably environmentally reinforced as well, energetically reinforced by the behaviors that we see around us. So this treason is based in a dis-ease energy that stirs in the unconscious. Most people aren't aware, oh, I'm supposed to do this, but they are not in touch with the unconscious motivation, the mainspring of their behavior, where there was this threat and this punishment or rage or what have you that forced the learning to do whatever that thing was. And so it becomes another topic for forgiveness. So if there's a dis-ease energy stirring in the unconscious, this is another place where forgiveness becomes very useful, because forgiveness opens the unconscious, exposes the unresolved power person dynamics, and most people shrink from interaction with that part of their own minds. Or we shrink from interaction with the person who would stimulate that part in us, because we don't want to face, we don't want to look at, we don't want to deal with that hidden part of our own minds. So if you find yourself with an undercurrent of disturbance, or on the edge around a particular behavior that seems like, the right behavior, understand that this propitiation, doing the highest treason, the right thing for the wrong reason, is a wound that most people don't want to open and don't want to look at. And the unwillingness becomes doubly offensive or treasonous, because unresolved is passed on to the next generation, perpetuating genetically an assault that ends up being inflicted generation after generation. In that case, first there's the associated physiological disease or disturbance in the cell. Literally remembering that when you think of thought, That thought becomes a neuropeptide. The neuropeptide, a literal molecule now in the structure that is a reflection of the structure of thought, circulates around in the body, finds a cell with a receptor site that matches, lands on that receptor site, and is integrated into the cell as what we would call chemistry. So this disturbance in the cell becomes a psychological disorder, and hiding from the internal nature of the disturbance, it's so easy to then jump into perceptual error or blame and project that unresolved upset. Physiologically, you might feel like pain in the pit of the stomach, an ache in the heart,
On to taxes.
or pain anywhere in the structure,
Oh boy.
which reflects in behavior, which is based in some sort of fear or hostility. And the hostility is always used, whenever hostility surfaces, it's always used in order to hide something, in order to dissociate from content of one's own mind. I recall working with a parent, and we're looking at the power person dynamic. I recall working with a parent who's, clearly, deeply, deeply cherished child, was somewhat under 2 years of age, very young. And the child knocked over some small parts that were being assembled by the parent. And the parent, who in a million years would never harm the child, just barked in a hostile, fear-inducing tone, a reprimand toward the child. The child is 2, less than 2. And this parent, when confronted with that, in her mind, she needed to justify what she had done.
Oh.
And it's a reflection of this whole, the right thing for the wrong reason,
I would like
needing to maintain her belief in herself as a perfect mom who had strived herself to be the perfect child.
That was my assumption.
put poop in the, then that's different for rinsing dishes, because rinsing dishes with a water bottle.
Right.
Really not.
I'm not sure, Celinda, how here. Nope. My apology. I'm not sure what happened there. So in any event, with this parent, when she was asked to look at the behavior toward the child, barked out, well, she really did do it, which was a half-truth. The child had, knocked over the small parts, but the child didn't do it, if that makes any sense. Yes, the child in their clumsiness had knocked over the parts, but the child didn't sit back and go, oh, I think I'll be naughty and knock over those parts. But the power person, having been blamed and having had to be perfect, simply projected that on her daughter and perpetuated the dynamic that had been put on her as a child. And to become aware of ourselves if we engage in that sort of behavior becomes, I think, most urgent to do. The parent addicted to being the perfect child, trying at all costs in her life to avoid her mother's wrath, was always obedient, always perfect, always the good little girl. But her mom, locked into saving her daughter from the fate of being condemned, simply passed on this power person dynamic of hallucinating unjustified blame that had then been imposed on the child. And it didn't matter how holy or deeply she strived to be the perfect parent, how hard as a child she strived to meet the impossible burden of avoiding resonating her mother's unresolved issues. It was always the accusation, always the pain of being the object of her mother's unconscious projected treason. Looking for the right thing, but looking for it out of the wrong reason. And of course, she wanted to be the perfect mom and wanted to be the perfect child. Oftentimes, this type of behavior is a generational assault that is a hangover from the unhealed religious mind, instilling its own unresolved guilt and fear in the tainted effort to be overly protective and ensure that the child is saved from this, fantasized external demon that's out to get us. And since the only true religion is to arrive in this life as conscious, active, present love, the only thing the child needs to be saved from is the unresolved assault and blame energy of the generations. And that's a task that is only carried out when each person in the family system is willing to do the work of looking into, let me back up a little bit with a different thought. It's unnatural for a human being to have an unconscious mind. It's unnatural for us to play out any sort of dynamic unconsciously. And to really be able to acknowledge and hold the space, to me, this is our job. I've learned this very deeply with my granddaughter, that my only job is to be that presence of active love. And if anything less than that comes up in me, to recognize that it's my work to do, to assist her in developing her energy field as a vehicle for her full expression of the truth of who she is. You might remember that Yeshua had this much misunderstood saying that said, "If any man come to me and hate not his father and his mother and his wife and his children, his brethren and his sisters, yea, his own life, he cannot be my disciple." It's like, well, wait a minute. Well, that's a total misinterpretation from the Aramaic. It's got nothing to do with hate, as in a love-hate relationship. It has to do with separating from or freeing ourselves from, forgiving the generational dynamics of any form of hostility or fear that have come from or been acquired through reinforced behaviors from any and every family member, anyone that we've ever interacted with. To heal, forgive, remove, hate, in that context as the Greeks misinterpreted it. Every issue that forms this false self. Remember, he says, in order for you to live, you've got to die. He's not talking about physical death. He's talking about this false self formed out of power person interactions with a multitude of people. And that we have to separate ourselves from those dynamics. And he's got that whole list: father, mother, wife, brethren, children, sisters.
Fill all the bottles and we use
And but they're the things that need to be faced and forgiven.
Yeah, like I did rinse my apples, but I made sure that it was just a tiny cream. It's too difficult. I would have used more water in a jug.
I'm just wondering if we could do
And we're still, I'm not sure, so Linda's phone has not disconnected. So Linda, perhaps you could hit the mute button, because when you talk, we're getting to hear from you.
Pick up the,
So,
okay.
in the context of T.S. Eliot's statement about, 'tis the highest treason to do the right thing for the wrong reason, any of these treasons that we've acquired in interaction with anyone ultimately is something that we need to remove fully from our own bodies, our own minds, our own nervous systems. Facing those things and applying the forgiveness tool is to step away from that self-imposed treason and dismantling all of the treasons that have ever made up, come from any interaction with anyone. And you'll remember, another of my favorite quotes from Jonas Salk: the most important thing in life is to be a good ancestor. And so ultimately, really, truly, fully claiming our human lives, fully connecting as the active presence of love within ourselves and uncovering and forgiving everything less than that. And so that's our objective with all of this work. And of course, if you're not using the forgiveness reality management worksheet process, remember that you can go to your app store on your phone and just type in the words Heartland, Heartland, Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness. And you'll be looking at the world's only forgiveness app. Download that. You can do the worksheet process right there. You can go to our website, whyagain.org, and you'll notice in the upper left-hand corner is a button that says Start Here. Jeanie has a video in there for how to use the app. And also, our webpage is up over 20,000 pages now. And so Jeanie's also got a video for how to navigate the app and the website and make as much use of it as possible. And of course, there are thousands of archives in our on our YouTube channel. And you can go to whyagain.org for all of the archives of our radio show, well over 5,000 hours. So we're delighted that you're here and appreciate the fact that you've joined us. I hope you're ready to have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's a wondrous gift to give the world, and you have the ability to give it, and the world certainly needs it. Blessings. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.